Welcome to Customer Driven with Chad McDaniel. Well known throughout the customer leadership industry, Chad has been the chief community leader for Execs in the Know, one of the top executive customer advocacy groups on the planet. With a passion for customer success and a desire to share and develop best practices, Chad's conversations with industry leaders aim to give unfiltered, unplugged access to industry peers who are customer obsessed, just like you. If you enjoy the show, please be sure to rate and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. Now here's your host, Chad McDaniel.
Welcome to another edition of Customer Driven with Chad McDaniel. And I, first of all, want to thank everyone for the listenership today. And we've got a tremendous guest with us today, Michelle Brigman, the CX Director from 7-Eleven. And I'll tell you, I've known Michelle for a few years now, and she's had a very impressive career. And we're going to walk through that a little bit. But really, I see Michelle as one of our leading shining stars in this industry, and some of her subject matter expertise, which we're going to get in. But we're absolutely blessed to have Michelle and her time in today's episode. And really the way I've titled this with Michelle is how to drive internal engagement and interaction models with meaningful results. And we're going to try to give as many examples and insights for our listeners here today. But before I officially introduce Michelle, first of all, for those that are not familiar with Execs in the Know, we are a very large brand-to-brand mentorship, best practice leaders, learning from leaders, corporate group. And it's everything around the customer equation. And we do a number of regional events and larger events. And our next national leadership event will be Denver, September 16th through the 18th. I really hope you'll mark those dates down for the Customer Response Summit. And we just continue to have a lot of passion and fun of driving best practices and insights. If you haven't been to our website, a great place to start. Just go to execsintheknow.com. If you go to the resources tab, you can see a number of our previous benchmark reports. We do a lot of different insights and benchmarks reports I encourage you to download. You also can go to the events calendar and see the full calendar of opportunities and things we're having. And the last thing I'll just remind our listeners here, for our corporate brand end users, we do have a private online community. It's called Know It All. It is a great way to directly connect on a persistent, ongoing basis with your peer group, asking the really tough questions and direct understandings from each other. The bottom line is, I call it #get involved. There are so many ways for you to get involved with your peers out there in this industry that are really wanting to help advance the overall learning and sharing. And Michelle is a perfect representation of that in sharing her time. And I've thought the world of Michelle over the years here in her career. So without further ado, let's get started. Michelle Brigman, I just want to make sure you're there and we can hear you okay. Good morning and hello.
Good morning, Chad. There's no place I'd rather be. Thank you so much for the invitation to come join you and the group listening today.
Well, for our listeners, Michelle, you're out of the Dallas area. I don't know if Texas has been a home for a long time for you or not, but I had the pleasure, I don't know if it was 4 or 5 years ago, to meet you for the first time at one of our briefings that we were hosting in Dallas. And I was so pleased that you were able to make some time in your calendar. But has Dallas been home for you, or Texas in general, or was that been a newer journey for you?
So I'm surprised the accent hasn't given it away, but I am Texas girl through and through. I've been in Dallas for quite a few years, but also lived in Austin and then Houston, but grew up in a really small town down in South Texas.
Let's go Texas. And we've got a lot of community members in Texas, so we can relate. And again, if you want to look Michelle up on her LinkedIn profile, last name is spelled Brigman, Michelle Brigman in Dallas, Texas. She is the CX Director with 7-Eleven. Now, Michelle, this has been more of a newer role for you in the last 8 months. I think previously you were at Dell and then you were at Citi. And one thing I would say about your career that I've always looked to for your leadership and insights is that you really are a master of what I would call listening systems or feedback system mechanisms and how to get buy-in towards those, and kind of creating unique insights and perspectives. And every brand listening to this episode today is going to have a need or a similar kind of scenario that I think you've been through. And I really think that 7-Eleven, part of why they may have brought you on board was for that expertise. Let's talk a little bit about 7-Eleven just for a minute there. Your role, what you were brought in to do, just to clarify for our audience, and then just any of the current sort of evolution of 7-Eleven.
You bet. So really, I have two core missions. One is customer service, supporting our U.S. and Canadian markets, as well as our customer feedback management system. So our survey program, where we're listening and acting on customer feedback. We want to do that to gain insight as to, what do we do well, and what do we need to do more of, so we can improve and deliver a better experience for our customers.
So with that in mind, let's kind of walk our listeners back a little bit. Maybe how did 7-Eleven become to be, and a little bit of the journey and the history. I think a lot of everyone listening knows 7-Eleven, but maybe there's a unique little backstory you can quickly share with us.
Yes. So 7-Eleven was founded on this idea of giving customers what they want, when and where they want it. And it was born when this gentleman by the name of Jefferson Green, they called him Uncle Johnny, he was running an ice house. And he acted on some customer feedback that asked him, we come by here, we're getting ice. It would be great if you would sell staples like bread, milk, and eggs, so that I could do more during that one visit. Hence, convenience was born. And I would say today that idea and premise has carried through. Now we're in something like 67,000 stores in 17 countries. And something that I found quite interesting is that over 50% of the population in the U.S. lives within a mile of a 7-Eleven. And like you, Chad, I grew up, there was a 7-Eleven down the street. So yes, I remember with my friends, we would run over to get Slurpees and our favorite candy bars, and maybe play a few video games growing up. So I think a lot of us have a lot of nostalgia tied around the brand.
Amazing. I did not realize, the mass scale, I knew it was big, but
Right.
You said 67,000 stores, and, the size and scale of that is amazing. So we labeled today's episode How to Drive This Internal Engagement and Interaction Models with Meaningful Results. And Michelle, I'm sure you've done some different things over the span of your career. Maybe we could start quickly at Dell, going back in time a little bit, and then Citi, and then currently today. And then I've got some specific things I want to ask you around some of these feedback systems.
You bet. Well, I think whenever I look at sort of what makes me tick, it is all about relationship. And it doesn't matter what company, what job, what title I had. That was always the sort of driving force. Am I listening and understanding what somebody needs? Because I think I felt this inner need to help fill that need, right? What can I do to help make their life better? And that has just proven to be a lot of sort of the guiding principle that has taken me on this path that I have done across multiple companies, multiple industries. So, for example, whenever I think about my time at Dell, I came in actually in sales. And from there, had the opportunity, and this is back in the early 90s, whenever it was a U.S. company only, had expanded globally, the opportunity really to listen to customers, understand their needs, learn about technology, and then enter into roles that allowed me to develop really process skills and invest in Six Sigma. I found that I had a kind of knack for process engineering, and had an opportunity to build out the Six Sigma program outside of the manufacturing departments and bringing that methodology into the business. So really responsible for driving some pretty significant change. And with that, talking about this spirit of listening, it was a matter of understanding what's important to the business, what are important to the individuals, and how do I create a program that people want to be a part of that's good for them and their own career development, but also is helping to deliver the right business metrics for the organization. And through that, this is in the time where there was no NPS. you heard about customer experience, and hadn't had the situation happen where my boss at one point, he said, so I heard something about social media. What is it? And is this something that we should be paying attention to? Why don't you go figure it out? And I think through that, being pretty resourceful, I didn't know anything about social media at that time, but I figured I could find somebody who did. And fortunately, within the company, we had a couple of really core experts that understood social, introduced me to industry experts that understood social. And now by taking that listening that I had done internally in terms of what are we trying to do, what are we trying to respond more effectively with customers, how do we learn from them, apply that process engineering, apply the need for the relationship, and now apply the social media expertise, that it ended up turning into what was one of the first listening command centers for social media in any industry, with Dell, standing that up and getting a lot of recognition, and so proud of that work for how we kind of went in with no real idea of how it was going to turn out, but we stayed true to let the customers guide us, and they will help build it. And that is a lot of what the ultimate result turned into.
So real quick for our listeners, Michelle, obviously Dell had an amazing social command center back in the day, and kind of really started that. What was the time frame that was around? Was that like 06, 07, I'm guessing here, but where was that for you, that you're in that period of time?
When I got involved, it was in 2009 with the question of what is it? And then by 2010, we had a social command center.
Unbelievable. When I started Execs in the Know, actually in 2010, one of the things that kicked it off for us was the evolution of social media as a new channel, and how brands were going to embrace that. And it was so new at the time, back at 09, 010, I guess. But so that was really the kickoff to this journey of what we would consider these listening and feedback mechanisms from that channel. And then that sort of grew and went on to Citi. Tell me about more of that.
You bet. Well, when I started with Citi, my job was running North America's customer experience program, which was a really large team. It had to do with executive escalations, process improvement, our survey strategy, call quality, customer interaction quality, process improvement, pretty broad function, and it supported all of the 4 lines of business. So credit cards, banking, our retail services business, and mortgage. And really enjoyed that, had a great time really rethinking that program. But what was interesting is, like many companies or CX practitioners, you go in and you find yourself sitting in a meeting and you're presenting out on what was the NPS score last month, or what was satisfaction, what happened, and you're always looking in the rearview mirror. And frankly, I was frustrated in that position. So I started kind of paying attention to what is it that my business leaders, what are they interested in? And obviously it's the financials, but everything that we talked about from a financial perspective was all forward looking. And I remember having a meeting with one of the operations leaders for one of the lines of business. And I was asking him about his priorities. And he pulled out those big binders, Chad, those big binders that are like 5-inch rings, just huge. He pulls out this.
I hated those, but yes.
Yeah, so he literally pulls one out. He opens it up. He starts flipping through the pages, and it was just full of reports. And he goes, "See this? See all of this? All of these reports, and I really can't tell you how my business is doing, and are we going to be able to make the number?" And it hit me right then that I don't need to, if I keep talking about what happened in the past, I'm not helping him deliver the results that he needs. So I need to do something radically different. And I got together with my team, pulled out a small group of my team members, and I said, look, here's the deal. I don't know the right answer, but let's put our heads together and figure it out. And we ended up building a predictive model around customer satisfaction. We went and met with all of our various business leaders. We understood what were key events that transpired, and then went back and looked at our data to understand some of the results whenever we implemented some of these initiatives. And what we found is there was actually a way to predict what the impact would be. And I'm not talking using fancy analytics. We were in Excel, we were using the great pieces of feedback we already have, and we were just sort of being creative and digging in and trying to figure it out. So I ended up being able to go back to the business leaders, and I would say, let me show you what your CX scores look like in the next 6 months. All of a sudden, the entire conversation changed, because now they understood the back-end impact to cost. Okay, if we know that this decision, so as an example, we were deciding if we needed to offshore a particular answering team. This is a business decision that they made frequently, and they made it based on the financials. But I was able to show, if you make this business decision, here's what your impact's going to be 3-6 months, not only from a CX score perspective, but also how many more calls were we going to get into our contact center? How much more time were we going to be spending resolving customer issues on the back end? So it became a measure of cost, and we could tell a prevention story as well as a customer experience story. So I said in a meeting, and it turned into, well, wait, before we make that decision, Michelle, can you run it through the model? What's the impact going to be? It was a very powerful moment where we realized that, okay, this is how you make CX valuable to the organization. Think about it differently, and please, let's stop talking about what happened last week, last month. Let's look at what's going to happen, and how do we either A, get ahead of it and mitigate the pain, or prevent it altogether, because we're able to influence something in the design phase before it actually is implemented.
So no question. Well, first of all, you brought me back to a time and period of Excel days, scheduling calls or whatever else in between. But wow, I'm glad we're past that. We have it's amazing though. It can be done. But there's a lot of background here, Michelle, that our community can draw from you. So let's fast forward now to 2019, and there's a plethora of tools and other things, I guess, out there. But as we look at these listening, design, thinking systems, or taking those insights from the listening, as we had talked about, how do you drive this internal engagement interaction models? For the listeners, where would be your advice, where to maybe start? Maybe people are already there, but what are the key things that you would really want to advocate from some of your learnings and some of maybe even the failures, lessons learned, that if I was sitting in the chair looking at this right now, where do I start, and what are the key things I really got to hone down on to get the success?
You bet. Well, so I think if you're in the space and you're in a role where you are a champion for the customer, you're there because you're kind of emotionally tied and invested to it. You really want to do right by them. And so it's hard sometimes whenever you walk into a meeting and you don't understand, why doesn't everyone else feel this strongly? Why am I telling a story where 5% of our customers are having a really bad experience? Why am I the only one who seems to care about that or think that's not acceptable? And I think I would get so invested that my message became diluted because they didn't speak the same language. So one of the first things I learned after much trial and error, and I say some battle scars, was I really did have to figure out what is the language that they are speaking. So getting out, asking questions. What are your goals this quarter? What are your goals this year? And the more you begin to understand that, then go back and look at your information and insight to decide, how do I position this differently in order to speak their language? And I became less and less likely to begin the conversation from a customer point of view. I became much more likely to bring it in from a business point of view. And I had to get over the hurdle of, am I being true to customers? Am I being a strong advocate? And what I realized is I could be a stronger advocate for them because I understood that what I was fighting for was what they wanted and needed, but I needed to flip the script a bit and do it from the business point of view. So if I knew that they are focused on sales in a certain category, maybe I'm bringing data differently to say, I researched customer feedback around that particular category. Here's what I found. Did you know that if you would do X, you would have 20% more customers satisfied with your product? Did you know that if this happened, here would be the benefit? So I was going in there instead of like, why is it okay that 5% of customers are hurting? I stopped doing that. And I went in with here's what it will mean to you and the continued success of your program if you did these three things. And then I became viewed as, okay, wait, she's on our team. She's helping me grow my business. She's helping me deliver on my numbers. And I don't feel like I'm being attacked for not doing more for customer experience.
So there's obviously I thank you for sharing that example. And there's a finesse, there's an approach. I mean, I think sometimes as CX leaders, we may feel like we sit in this bubble. And how do we get the movement of the executive or the financial people to move the cheese for us? And it always starts with data, and it starts with some of the financial metrics and impacts that speak to their language, no question. Did you take it any deeper than that, or was that all it took with the right kind of data points, or any comment on that in general?
Yes, a couple of other things I did. One is I quit speaking in percentages. I started giving very raw numbers, and I could start sometimes accumulating those numbers on top of each other. So for example, instead of saying, 1% of customers had this pain point, I would talk in the terms of, this week we had 50,000 customers call us. And of those 50,000 customers, their issue was related to, 30,000 of them called me about this particular issue. If we did this, we could stop those calls. I can bring in next week now, as long as this keeps going, I'm going to project how many customers are going to be impacted by this if we don't resolve it. So it was 30 this week. Next week, it's an additional 40. All of a sudden, those numbers begin to add up, and you look at the customer impact. So it became much more meaningful, and it drove a sense of urgency. So lose the percentages, speak in numbers, and don't be afraid to add holistically customer impact, because sometimes you need that just in order to pack a bigger punch. Again, being able to convert it to I knew the cost of a call. So I could say, it's costing us this amount to handle these types of issues. I could say, if we fixed it, we would prevent this many customers from having that negative digital experience. So if I'm talking with my partners in, say, marketing or technology even, maybe they're introducing a new app into the organization. And I can say, they want more and more customers to use that app. And that is one of their success metrics. So if I can say I'm able to quickly detect a pain point, get it corrected, i.e., partner with me to help prioritize a bug to be fixed instead of letting it linger. And then we're going to make sure that we prevent this many customers from having that same issue. And being able to talk in those hardcore numbers resonated.
I love the examples. So glad this is recorded so our listeners can continue to go back and take the proper notes. And by the way, for our listeners, you've been listening to Michelle Brigman from 7-Eleven. She is the CX director. I call her the industry guru in creating effective listening feedback mechanisms and turning them to profitable insights and results. But that's my title for you, Michelle, and being a community champion of us. So I'm going to play third-party devil's advocate here a little bit and say, Michelle, I'm listening to you. I'm doing that. It sounds great. I subscribe to it, but it's still not getting the impact or getting the noise. So what do I do? Well, maybe I go find a new company. Wrong leadership group I happen to be working for, but it's not always that easy.
Mm-hmm.
But outside of that piece of it, I guess it's really sitting down in the value of how they see the customer feedback and the mechanisms. And I think majority of all of brands and executives are going to value that if it's put in the right kind of outlay and interpretation. But I'm going to leave it to, what if I'm still hitting some brick walls? Do you have any other thoughts or suggestions or ideas?
Well, certainly. And in fact, I just had a situation affect me personally. We just had our annual event for 7-Eleven where we bring in our franchisees and our field operations teams. And I worked really hard to come up with a vision of how I wanted our learning area to look, what our key messages were, what our outputs were. So lots of work. The day of the event comes in, and I have the people stopping by to listen and learn, and they would immediately pivot to, they want to take the conversation somewhere else. And for a couple of moments, I kept trying to stay true to my message. And then I realized, okay, I know better. I know better. This isn't working. I have to pivot. And I stopped and I said, okay, so tell me, what is it that is causing your day a lot of friction around customer experience? And the message kept coming back the same way. Like they wanted to do what was right for the customer, but at the end of the day, they were getting customer issues coming to them that they were not equipped to resolve. And that was drowning out any grander strategy, any greater intent, any greater vision. At the end of the day, there was friction in what they were trying to accomplish. And so I had to just throw out what I walked in there intending to do. And I had to go, all right, let's roll up our sleeves and let's get into that. I have come back from that event, completely changed how I present to them, because if I don't build credibility around making their life more seamless and addressing that pain point, there will never be able to tune in and listen to the grander plans and vision that I see for our company. And it's been interesting how I went from sort of feel like I was having to push really hard to now I can barely keep up with the pace that they want to run this program forward. So that is one where I think we constantly just have to pause and say, all right, if this isn't working, then you tell me what you need. I come in, that you have to tell me, and then you listen and you react to it.
Yeah, I mean, there's no need to continue to hit our head against a brick wall, especially if it's going on deaf ears. And you literally have got to take that moment and address it and be brave and intent with it to find out what do they need and want. And but at the end of the day, I hopeful that most of our listeners, that's not the problem they're experiencing per se in their own organizations, that management is very receptive. It's just a matter of the how-to and some of the systems in place to support that. I was going to say, Michelle, with a little bit of time we have left, just a couple of quick questions. As far as over the years here, outside of the good old manual Excel back in the early days, are there any particular tools or anything you know of that I'm listening to this that I may want to look into or to consider to help me in this journey of feedback systems and implementation?
I think that the more you can use, if you have a good feedback survey program, let's say, if you've got a good feedback survey program that has strong text analytics and being able to let that do the heavy lifting for you, highly recommend. I'm not, I won't make a recommendation on a particular vendor, but there's certainly something I would say as you're looking at those platforms, look under that hood closely to make sure that it's mature text analytics capability, because I think that can just make your program that much stronger. I think from a listening perspective, and we didn't really talk about some of the work I did in the back part of my time with Citi, but it was standing up real-time digital listening for customers. And there's some really great platforms out there as well where you can watch customer behaviors while they are engaging with your digital tools to see, are they refreshing the screen more often than normal? Are they toggling back between screens more often? Something that would indicate maybe a point of customer friction that you can trigger an alert and know where to go deep dive and do a little bit of research to see if this is something that's unique to this customer, or is this something that could be indicative of a broader problem that we can get ahead of before we're waiting around for our phone to ring and customers to say, hey, I can't do something whenever I was trying to use your app. So I think being able to look at how do you integrate some of those capability into listening from social, listening from survey feedback, as well as marrying that with some of these other sources of that would indicate how easy is it for your customer to do business.
And again, the good news is this is not a one and done. Michelle is definitely a community champion of this industry, and she's going to be around to continue to provide guidance and insights to our leaders out there, to the conversation that we've been having about some of these effective mechanisms. And if you'd like to get a hold of Michelle, feel free. You can reach out to myself, Chad at execsintheknow.com, and happy to make an introduction. Or, Michelle's been a great community advocate of Execs in the Know and well appreciated. My last question on our time here, it always goes so fast, by the way, Michelle, as I mentioned to you, but I like our audience to get to know you a little bit better personally. Tell us, I know you do some volunteering, I think women in IT and other board roles that you play in the local stuff in the Texas area. Tell us a bit about just how you're continuing to be such a great personal advocate out there in your community.
Thanks. Well, I think one of the things that probably I get the most passion from and just the most energy from is whenever I can spend time with people in their career who are trying to figure out, can I do this? Afraid of maybe taking that next step forward. I love to mentor. I love to speak with women, men who are trying to figure out what does it take in order for me to take that next step? So I do a lot of speaking within various network organizations, diversity organizations, because I just really would, if I could get paid to help someone becoming their best self, I think that would be my next job, my next career choice. That's something that I really love, because I think we're so afraid and we tend to doubt ourselves. And I mean, I have that same challenge as well. And then just finding the courage to put a foot forward and try something and ask for help, because people are all around you willing to lend a hand and support you. And I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't my willingness to ask and learn and really invest in those relationships.
Well, you are a shining star in Texas. You give Texas something to be very proud of, to call you part of their community. So, Michelle Brigman, thank you so much. And for our listeners, today's episode, again, if you've got a interesting insight, success, and capability like Michelle, that you really are interested in helping this industry learn and pay it forward, I'd love to talk to you about possibly being a future guest on our podcast series. I do want everyone, if you could please rate and subscribe. Your feedback is also very important to me, the value of today's episode. And I know it goes so fast and there's only so much we can cover, but the good news is, as I mentioned earlier, Michelle is here and part of this community. So on behalf of myself, Michelle, you've been a true spirit and a gem for today's call. Thank you so much. And our listeners really valued your time.
Thank you, Chad, again for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Everyone have a great day and keep customer top of mind.
Thank you for listening to Customer Driven with Chad McDaniel. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to rate and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. It really makes a difference in helping others find the podcast. For more information on our customer experience community, please visit execsintheknow.com.